Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with host Peter DeWitt. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure every student is learning, not by chance, but by design.
Hey, Ariel. It's good to hang out with you for a little while. I always like
Hey, Peter.
Spending time with you. So our whole podcast focuses this season on rekindling engagement. So before we get started with the actual podcast, what did you do to rekindle engagement for the week?
Oh, I had a long weekend with family, which was great, but I started fresh this morning with some yoga, and that was a fantastic way to just get in the right mindset for the week to come, not knowing what's really ahead, but just getting ready for whatever comes.
I went up, I live in Albany, as you know, New York, and I went upstate to the foothills of the Adirondacks to my hometown, and I went cross-country skiing, but we had a lot of wind and there were a lot of pine cones, and those pine cones will get you every time. I fell and I thought I broke my thumb. So, so that was interesting, but no, just a contusion. So I'm good. But
okay.
Sunday I went back because there was fresh snow coming. So I ended up skiing 10 miles. So I'm feeling engaged. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Not bad for 50, right? So
yeah, yay for that physical activity to get us in the right mindset.
You know, we need every bit of help we can get. You know what else rekindled my engagement was the podcast that people are about to listen to with Candice Raskin and Melissa Krull, the authors of The Principal Leadership for Racial Equity, a field guide for developing race consciousness. What a powerful conversation we just had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm super excited for listeners to hear some of the ideas that Melissa and Candace talk about are just so incredibly invigorating for this year as we go into 2021. Melissa says there's a great deal of resistance to doing what's right for students. And that just kind of hit me. It's like, oh, that's so true. And it's heartbreaking. And a lot of their work is around breaking down that resistance. And she says later that resistance is a slow down strategy, not an end. It kind of reminded me of Ryan Holiday's work of the obstacle is the way, of seeing those obstacles and seeing that resistance and not being put off by it, but seeing it as something that you just have to work with and find ways to go around.
I really like that. As I told them, they have very tweetable comments, so that was good. But Candace, I really enjoyed the fact that we got into the fact that people will look at this, especially white people, and say stuff like, well, if we have if our school is 99% white, we really don't have to talk about diversity, and we don't have to talk about race and equity. And I like that she addressed the fact that is the very reason that we need to be able to talk about race and equity, even in predominantly white schools.
That's
because
right.
It all starts with us. So yeah, that part was really great to engage in dialogue with her about.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's get to it. Enjoy the show, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Great to have you back to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Peter DeWitt. Each week, I'll be interviewing someone from the field, and I'm pretty excited about this season's lineup of thought leaders who have worked in education around the globe, so make sure you subscribe. This season's theme is rekindling engagement after COVID-19, and we know that's not easily done, not just for students, but also for parents and all teaching staff. With me today is Candice Raskin and Melissa Krull, authors of the book Principal Leadership for Racial Equity, a field guide for developing race consciousness. Candace and Melissa teach in the Administrative Licensure Graduate Program at Minnesota State University and advise doctoral students as a professor in the Department of Educational Leadership. Together, they are the founders of the Institute for Courageous Principal Leadership. Candace and Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank
Nice
you,
to
Peter.
see you.
Good to be here.
That was a mouthful to try to say. Some of those introductions really get the best of me sometimes. So Melissa, I'm gonna start with you. I really want to know, what is courageous principal leadership?
Yeah. Well, title of that book. Yeah. I think that title stems from our work. Well, probably formerly as superintendents, but mostly just people in education who have really wanted to encourage leaders to make decisions that are not always easy, but are in the best interest of all students. And when I say in the best interest of all students, what I'm specifically talking about, the best interest of students of color. And that stems, of course, from the historical patterns that we are familiar with, which show that not all students are, showing equitable outcomes or results in schools, and also not getting equitable opportunities or access. And it takes courage, and it takes, inner strength and motivation interest to act on behalf of all students. And there's a great deal of resistance around doing what is right for all students in schools. And sometimes resistance, causes us to slow down or step back or second guess ourselves. And what we really want to encourage in leaders is the courage to step into the work, to take a risk, especially if it's something I am not familiar with, if it's something I have not learned yet, if it's something I don't think I'm really proficient at, I still have to find it within me to do what I think is best and right so that all kids get what they need in schools, and then show outcomes that are equitable. And for us, sometimes it does take courage. It takes a willingness to risk, a willingness to do something I'm unfamiliar with, but do it anyway because we know that it's in the best interest of all kids.
Thank you for that. I'm a big fan of Bandura's work out of Stanford and the whole idea of self-efficacy. And
Yep.
he had some really great research back in 2000 that, showed that when leaders feel confident, they double their efforts. When they feel a lack of confidence, they slacken their efforts. So Candace, I guess this question is, how about for you, when we look at courageous leadership and about getting leaders to actually step up and do the right thing, how do you go from preaching to the choir to actually connecting with people that have changed that behavior? They went from sort of ignoring or staying away from how they engage marginalized populations, and they've moved into wanting to have a deeper impact. How have you addressed that?
So Melissa and I, the book is based on an institute that we've run for 10 years, and it's a 2-year institute. And the reason it is 2 years is we really have found that if you don't start, two white individuals, white women like myself, if I don't start with my own socialization, racial consciousness, understanding, unpacking what I do, how I view the world, which is true for all of our, especially white leaders, that's the first step to getting someone to transform. And also the idea of courageous conversation or courageous leadership came out of some research that we did when we started the Institute. We started looking at ourselves, developing our race consciousness, understanding race, understanding how in my white family, we didn't talk about race, but my Black colleagues, race is a part of their life all the time. So coming to grips with that, and then really unpacking what makes a difference in schools. It's not small class sizes, it's relationships, it's feedback, it's knowing students. So teaching those skills, and then the Institute then moves on to say, okay, take on something. Find a group of students that are not being successful. Age all the techniques and skills, your racial consciousness, and get a result that's different than our predictable results. We get that result, we build confidence. And that came out of our research. We really didn't expect that confidence piece, but once they get through the resistance and they have confidence, then they continue to expand and scale up. So right now in schools, we do lots of technical things, but the idea of really looking at ourselves as racially conscious or a racial being, figuring out who we are racially and what we see the world as, and helping them understand how we build a system based on white culture and how to unpack that and change that is a process. And we see our folks at the end of our 2-year institute really looking and seeing policies, practices, their students, how they engage, what they believe and how they behave all differently.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because it's interesting when I'm interviewing two people who are white to be able to talk about these
Yeah.
issues. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I remember I was doing an interview one time where somebody put in the chat box, "We don't have a black problem. We actually have a white problem." And that was a quotation that came from the end of World War II, actually, because I looked it up. And I think you're absolutely right. It's about being able to address these issues and talk about these issues and look at it from sort of our perspective. And I think that whole idea of white privilege is something people don't take into account because they throw it off like that's not a real thing, when in reality it is. So I want to bring up an example. You have a new book, which I have had the pleasure of reading, Principled Leadership for Racial Equity, a field guide for developing race consciousness. And at the beginning of the book, you have a very powerful story. You said at the beginning of the book, you asked people to reflect on how they are socialized around race. And you even gave some specifics, but what does that mean, socialized around race?
Well, you're probably referring to this piece of curriculum that we do spend a lot of time on, which is the cycle of socialization, first defined by Bobby Harrow. And we refer to that piece as, and it's one of those first steps. So when we're meeting a group for the first time, and just like Candace said, we're talking about sort of, what are those things that I see? What are those things that I don't see? What is it that I don't know about myself? The cycle of socialization is a process where we sit back and we ask ourselves some really basic questions, like, how did race come into my life in the first place? Like, how did I ever become familiar with race? When was I first conscious of race? Glenn Singleton, of course, has done a ton of work around this and uses it in his books, and I am one of his students. So I learned early on that for me to be really effective in my own work as a white woman around race, I had to come to grips with how I was socialized. So what were my earliest memories? What's my own racial autobiography? Where did I live as a young person? Who did I go to school with? In elementary school, middle school, and high school. What values did my family hold around race? What messages did I hear? What television shows did I watch? Where did I attend church? What were my community connections? All of those things contribute to what we say my socialization around race. And from that come ideas and beliefs. And we learn them very young and we carry them through our lives. And once those beliefs are set, I take actions in accordance with those beliefs. And those actions are directly linked to the beliefs that I hold for whatever reason, whatever that early socialization was. And so we've used Harrow's work to inform us around race, to help us come to an understanding about that, and then really study our actions, because we are strong believers that our actions are linked to the beliefs that we hold. So let's study the beliefs and let's study the origin.
That is extremely powerful work. So Candace, what is it like for people to go through that, knowing that so many people don't like to talk about race, so many people don't like to talk about these kind of issues because they find them to be uncomfortable or they don't want to face them? What has it been like when you both have approached this topic with other people? What kind of experiences are people having during this situation?
To think about it, how Melissa and I usually introduce this is we walk through the social cycle of socialization with someone who looks different than me. It could be a Latina, it could be an African American, and then I could walk through it because I also bring women, white, and age with it. So my socialization looks different than Melissa or yours. And so we walk them through that publicly. We get someone to volunteer so people can see the differences in how we have been informed, the words that have formed my vision, what I was messaged as a white woman. And so then, and you put the age generation on that. I was messaged that I could be a nurse or a teacher. That was my messaging. So how that looks different from my Latina friend who came here when she was 5. So you look at those socializations, and then then there's uncomfortableness for the white individuals. There's grappling. There's all those things, but our message constantly is if you can talk about race, without getting defensive, without feeling guilty, with all those things. If you can have honest conversations about race and about your socialization, you can start to change what's happening for kids in schools. And like Melissa said, we are firm believers that we say we believe this, we behave in this way, but the results are exactly what we believe. And so right now in our system, in our school system, the results are a reflection of what the leaders believe. And so you got to look at that connection and that whole socialization. That's a great place to start. And then Melissa talked about the next thing we do is we follow that up with racial autobiographies, really studying. When was the first time I realized I was white? Because oftentimes white individuals do not look at themselves as having a race. When, who socialized me? What were the messages that my grandfather gave me? I think about those things. And then you present that to your colleagues. And you get to see the diversity and the narrowness that we often view the world in and our decisions. And so that's the next step in that whole first year of unpacking how we were socialized, what's our race story, and how does that look different? And then starting to think about a population of kids in a classroom. If we only look at it through my race story, then we miss all the messages from all those children and we miss their stories. So we keep that race at the center of everything we do. And we try really hard to keep it personal, local, and immediate, that everyone has their own journey in their own time frame.
I like that, personal, local, and immediate. So
that's Singleton. That's Singleton. I got to give you
Oh, okay. So Candace, I want to stay with you because everything you were talking about, I remember Zaretta Hammond, I was talking with her and she uses the phrase words matter. And one of the things that I really liked about your book is that you referred to white code and used phrases like student behavior. So I want to ask you, and I'll stick with you, Candace, what does white code mean? And what do you do about those leaders who either don't see it or they don't want to see it?
Yeah. So white code, it's white structure, it's white culture, it's the lens in which we look at schools and how we discipline and how we look at our children, behavior, discipline. It's all coded in whiteness and compliance. And so what do we do with the leaders? That's actually why we took the curriculum from the institutes and moved it into the book. We've literally hundreds and hundreds of people have gone through our institute, but to truly change what's happening, you got to look at yourself, you got to figure out what you're doing, and you got to figure out how that looks, how we're built in this white culture. So much of what white code, white culture, so much of what drives schools. If you look at discipline, defiance, we use words, we use things that really put all of the onus on our students and excuse the adults and allow us to think about compliance. And so that's that idea of we have to really look at white culture and how it's in our schools. And we don't have white kids in schools. That's not who's there. We have a multitude of different students and cultures in our schools, and they come with different expectations. And so for us to put compliance and white language on the environment is harmful, and it produces the exact results we have for our students of color.
I can imagine that
historically, I should say historically, that the results have been predictable. I think, Melissa, is it 70 years we said? The NAP data?
Oh, the NAP data. 47 going back to 1975. 47 years, we can predict the results. And so unless we change what we expect in schools, how we look at our students, Yvette Jackson's work, how we look at all of our students as gifted, if we look at their strengths, we look at who they are, what they bring, and stop this applying white code, white language, white practices on a system that is not white.
So to me, it also sounds like not even if we have schools that are diverse, I think that it's also the schools that are predominantly white as well, right? Because a lot of this is fostered when we were children. You were talking earlier about when did we notice we were white and those kind of things. I grew up in a place in upstate New York that was about 99% white. So I would imagine that these kind of lessons that we're talking about, this kind of education, is equally as important for those schools Because I could see how people would say, oh, this isn't about us because we don't have a diverse school. In reality, that's not true, correct?
Yeah, true.
Melissa, what are you?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, a lot, yes. I mean, we hear that, do I need to study this work because the school that I'm leading is 95% white? Mm-hmm. And so our response is more than ever, like just more than ever, because without another perspective, even if you're not literally in the room with multiple racial perspectives, first of all, it doesn't mean that you can't get them. And there are ways to get multiple racial perspectives, even in a predominantly white setting. But the danger of that is that those patterns of whiteness and privilege, white code, all those things you were just talking about, they just continue and they deepen and the roots go deeper. And so we end up producing students who have finished learning without another perspective, without another layer of understanding, without knowledge about, like, for example, true history, right? Or without engaging in curriculum with practices that are really much different than traditional, let's say, instructional practices. And the other, I think, fundamental danger is that we end up graduating students into a world that is not 95% white. Mm-hmm. And so if we want to produce a new set of young adults coming into a very diverse and a much more a country and a world that is becoming more diverse, we want to produce students who then become leaders, who have multiple perspectives and see the world racially, through multiple racial lenses. And it's our job to create those conditions, no matter who those kiddos are sitting in school with.
Yeah, every time I talk about race and equity, one of the underlying themes that comes up a lot is that of a deficit mindset, that people have a deficit mindset based on students who are ELL. They will have a deficit mindset when students are Black, brown. And so that's been something that I think is really important at the heart of the work that you're doing as well. So I have one more question about about the podcast, because our whole season this season is on rekindling engagement. And we know that people are burned out from COVID. And we know that the very topic that you both are experts in and lead in are the ones that the people, when you're tired, it's the easiest to say, I don't have time to do it right now. So how do you rekindle engagement right now with the vast work that you're doing, whether it's in your, with your doctoral students, whether it's in the programs? How do you work to rekindle engagement around a topic that is probably one of the most uncomfortable for people to talk about?
Well, one thing I'll just throw in right away is that it's not a negotiable it's not negotiable. So it just is a way of doing business. So whether it's university class, if you think about university courses, right, a lot of them are on Zoom right now. And the way we deliver our program it's just automatically grounded in race. Mm. So I think for us, it's not a rekindling as much as it is a continuation. So a person who's starting a program as a brand new student automatically engages in content. So, for example, we use textbooks now that are grounded in race equity as content. So Yvette Jackson's work on the pedagogy of confidence, or Glenn Singleton's book on courageous conversations. Those are just routine textbooks for us now. So we don't even try to assume that it's a new way. We really try to encourage and establish a mindset that this is the way of learning now. That's kind of what came up for me automatically with that.
I love that.
I can give an example in our doctorate. I can give an example in our doctorate program. We used to teach, Bowman and Deal systems and organizations as a foundational class. We still use Bowman and Deal, but we do it through the lens of critical race theory. So you need to look at systems and structures through the systems of race and critical race theory. And that changes. And through the historical context of seeing white, how does white show up in our systems and organizations? So that everything we do is race-centered. Therefore, it's always a part of the curriculum for the Rekindling. I will just add one other thing. It was interesting as we finished several, I think it was our first 4 or 5 cohorts, students that had principals who had finished with us came back and said, oh, we need help because it's so easy to become unengaged when we are not in conversation. And so Melissa and I just created a place called 2.0, which for every year, they just come back and we advance the curriculum. These are the folks that are in trenches doing the work every day, but without an ability to stay connected to one another. It's exactly what you talked about, Peter. They could feel themselves, especially the white individuals who have the ability to step out of the work. They found themselves doing that. And so each year our 2.0 actually keeps getting larger and larger because as folks get into the work, they realize that they need one another to think through the really difficult changes that need to occur.
So it sounds like you really created a communities of practice approach that we know is equal or is important because of the fact that you're keeping that cycle going. It's not you're out of the program now and bye-bye, good luck.
Yes.
It's that you can come back. And I think that is so fantastic. So the last question before we end the podcast. And one of the things that I find is that when we've got textbooks or curriculum that we have to cover and all that stuff, it's so easy for us as teachers and as leaders, I'm a former building principal, to go in and think it's always about us teaching. When I think that when we go into schools, we really need to be open to the fact that we're not just there to teach, we're there to learn. So you two are experts, you're working with doctoral students, you've got these really great programs and practice. So I would say, each one of you, I'd like to know, what's the greatest lesson you have learned over the years that you've done this work? What is something that you've learned as you go in to teach? What is something you've learned through the program? So Melissa, I'll start with you.
Mm-hmm. To be prepared for people to push back. Mm-hmm. And I learned that actually before I came to the university. And, it's a story. I actually had a really rich conversation with Glenn Singleton about this once. And, I think I've really just learned to be prepared and to prepare yourself for people who won't agree with the work that we're trying to encourage leaders to take on. And that resistance doesn't mean it's over. It just means it's resistance and that there are ways to navigate through. And that confidence in myself or confidence in other leaders who are taking in this new information is a path through the resistance to the other side where you really see results for all kids, especially Black and Brown students. But it takes me being prepared for it and me understanding how I navigate through it to get to the other side so that I can continue on. And that resistance is a slowdown strategy, but it isn't an end. It's just something that I have to be prepared for and that I have to know how to respond to it.
I appreciate that. I like that you just said it's a slowdown strategy. It's not an end. And I think I need to keep that in mind as I get resistance. Candace, what about you? What is one of the greatest lessons you've learned over the years of doing this work?
Well, one of the greatest lessons I think I learned, of course, the resistance piece and preparing for it, because from my superintendency, when I wasn't prepared, that's when I really the work was unearthed or was taken away. But I think for me, it's really thinking about how to interrupt, and that so often our principals are not skilled in how to hold a really direct, concrete conversation about race or about something that's happening in a way that they move the work. So our principals that have graduated from the Institute, we actually do some work around that, say that what they found is that they hold so many more conversations that are direct about interrupting practices. They're clear what they believe in, and that people generally, because they're so solid in their beliefs, that their behaviors follow that. And then when someone comes and asks them the answer to a question, they already know the answer before they get it. So when you believe, you behave, and you are really clear about that, and you don't let those little things, those little problems go unaddressed because they just compound and build up. And so that would be something that I think I've really learned. And probably the other thing is I never truly understood the importance of the personal work in this work that has to happen before you can truly see. I think about a white male that was in our program, and I can still remember him saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't, because I see it now." And he goes, "And I was just always told I was right. As a white man, I was always told I was right." He goes, "And I am so wrong." And it was just interesting to watch him. And we talk a lot about, once you see what we're doing in schools and systems around race and systemic racism, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it just becomes the fiber of your work.
Absolutely right. What a great way to end. So, Melissa and Candace, for people that don't know your work, where can they find you?
Yeah. Well, we have a website where our book will be soon, and that it's racialequityleadership.com. You get that right,
good.
Candace?
And then yes, you did. And also the book is for pre-sale on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. It's designed for systems to use for groups of principals to work together. And then on our website, and I think Melissa and I are being a National Institute for the first time due to our ability to use Zoom. And so that'll be launched on our website also.
Congratulations. And thank you both for the work that you're doing. The new book is called Principal Leadership for Racial Equity, a field guide for developing race consciousness. Candice Raskin, Melissa Krull, thank you so much for being guests on Leaders Coaching Leaders.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation with Melissa and Candice. It was, like Ariel and I said at the beginning, it was very powerful. What I would like people to think about, Ariel, and I know you're going to give them some places they can go to. What I would really like is for people, as they listen to the podcast, think about just one actionable step they can take. What is one thing they can do after they turn this podcast off? That one actionable step that they can take in a positive direction to really do this work. And I think Candice and Melissa gave a lot of nuggets there.
That's right, definitely. And for everyone listening or watching on YouTube, I want you to know that you can go to corwin.com/leaderscoachingleaders for show notes, resources from the podcast, and to offer feedback. So you can check that out at corwin.com/leaderscoachingleaders. And if you don't want to listen to the podcast, you can also watch it on YouTube. So I encourage you to go check that out. Thanks so much.
I think we look pretty good on YouTube, actually.
Hey, I think so too.
All right, Ariel, well, good to see you. And until the next time.
Thanks, Peter.